Today I'm joined by Julie Spinks, who's Managing Director of WRAS. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Tom.
Can you tell me a little bit about WRAS and the organisation?
Okay, so we're the Water Regulations Advisory Scheme. Our purpose is to promote the water fittings regulations and bylaws in Scotland, and we do that to protect public health so that water is always safe in buildings. And safe means not contaminated and not wasted. We have three arms to us, so 3 departments. The first one is WRAS subscriptions, so we work with water companies to collaborate, to understand risks and to find industry best practice and to promote the regulations. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing is WEAPS, so that department looks about plumber registrations and plumber professionals. And we also work with 7 approved contractor schemes across the UK. And we administer WaterSafe, which is kind of a unifying brand. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is we run voluntary approval schemes for water fitting products and materials.
And how do you think that WRAS and BMA and indeed other manufacturers can work more effectively with you and the water industry?
I think probably there are 3 good foundations for that. The first one is really to understand where we've got some common issues that we could do with working on that we both benefit from. The second thing is probably to understand where we disagree about issues as well. And maybe we don't disagree on so many things that we think about. And the third thing is actually it's about standing in each other's shoes and understanding the constraints that water companies have and that manufacturers have as well. And I think once you've got those 3 things, then you can start working jointly on solutions.
We were talking before the cameras were rolling about some of the constraints that you face. And indeed, there's some areas for joint lobbying, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably, the biggest opportunity that we have to work together right now is about compliant products. So you've got, members that are committed to compliant products and selling them. And it's not fair that they're competing with people who can't be bothered to spend the money to test. So if if customers buy something off a shelf, they expect it to be compliant when they install it. And they'd frankly be quite angry if they buy something that then contaminates their water supply. So water companies understandably are quite interested in that, and your members too, because they're spending thousands of pounds on these tests and they're being undercut by, frankly inferior products. So I'd love to see lots more activity around that particular issue.
And compliance is right at the top of our agenda for the reasons that you've identified. We're looking at different ways where we can help our members to make sure that they are able to demonstrate compliance in a way that's complementary with WRAS and indeed some of the other voluntary schemes that are out
Absolutely.
there.
There's, WRAS has got 1 approval schemes. There are other schemes. We're really interested, from a water company perspective, from enforcers, that products are compliant by, whatever scheme. And you talked about constraints there as well. And so kind of one of the real things that people misunderstand is things that water companies can do and can't do. So, for example, the test code sheets that are written within the regulations aren't for the enforcers to change. The regulator is DEFRA, and it's up to them to change, but it might be an area where water companies and manufacturers can agree about that they need to change. That's an opportunity as well.
And do you think standards are perhaps in many areas a meaningful replacement for test code sheets in that they're dynamic and can change with
yeah, definitely.
times?
Well, there are 3 routes for compliance. CE marking, there are British standards or equivalent, or the test code routes, and they're all equally valid routes. But at least with the British standard, you can change it. In terms of compliance, everybody's got a voice and a seat at the table. Everybody gets consulted, and it's up to manufacturers to get involved or not. So there are some excellent standards, and there's some problems with that coming up. Shall I tell you about them, Tom?
Please do. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things is the regulations actually haven't changed for 20 years. There's been some minor amendments, but actually Brexit is creating a change. So the government actually has written in the floods and water amendment some changes to Regulation 4, and that's about suitable quality and standard. So whereas we've had CE marked products, we've had British standards or their European equivalent and test code sheets, we lose the first option. So CE marked products mysteriously disappears from the list. Now, I don't think that was what they intended, but I think unless DEFRA clarify that point, enforcers are going to be confused, manufacturers are going to be confused, and we're going to have a whole heap of problems when this gets enacted when the implementation period finishes at the end of December. So I'm worried about that issue. And WRAS have written to DEFRA to say either, it would be great if you change the regulations because we want the CE marked or the equivalent UK mark recognised, or tell us what you intended, because if you've written to people publicly, then it will be easiest, that will be a clarification that we can act on.
Certainly our stance on Brexit is, in terms of harmonisation with Europe on standards, we want to continue without any unnecessary divergence. And that's not never saying never, but it was just making a pragmatic approach of this. These have been kind of dynamically put together over a course of years with lots and lots of UK import.
Definitely.
Don't diverge for the sake of it.
And I think that's a worrying time for manufacturers. Lots of your members, lots of manufacturers in general, operate across Europe and the world, and actually having common standards is really quite helpful. And having a different market in the UK isn't helpful, I think. So some of the messages that we're hearing about not needing common standards is a little bit concerning. But the regulations, the other important bit about that change in the regulations is they say British standard, they have said British standard or equivalent European. Now they say British standard or equivalent standard, which could be, anywhere in the world. Potentially that could be more helpful to manufacturers operating in different areas, but they'll have to prove their equivalence to a British standard.
And lots of work for both manufacturers and WRAS in that case in global standards.
Potentially, yes, and that could be quite hard work, couldn't it, in terms of making those comparisons?
So what's on the horizon for WRAS that has an impact on manufacturers?
So I think there's quite a lot of going on. We talked briefly before about WCs, and I think WRAS is going to be less involved in that because you've got some very good mechanisms to have direct conversations with water companies about backflow and compliance, and leaky loos I think is a hot topic. But so for WRAS specifically, we're quite interested. We've talked a bit about Brexit already. The Drinking Water Directive is coming on the horizon. We've also got metals is quite a hot topic, which I think we both need to pay attention. Water efficiency more general as well. So if I go back and talk about metals, the two metals that are really causing concern because they're a health concern are lead and nickel, and particularly for nickel plating. So in the case of lead, proven health effects reducing IQ for children. So that's not a thing that manufacturers want to be associated with. There is no safe level for lead, so we kind of need a responsible position and a general move towards alloys that use less lead. That's really what we need to see in the future. Nickel's been more emerging over the last few years, so people underplay the health effects of nickel, I think. There's better information coming out. Some people get really sensitive to nickel, and it tends to be contact dermatitis that people suffer from, so particularly problems with the skin. The advice from Public Health England feels like it's changed because they need to tailor advice depending on who's in the home. So if you've got an exceedance on nickel and someone's sensitive, then what you might do as a result is quite different. And so for manufacturers, nickel can be in the alloys, but it's particularly known for causing a problem where you've got chromium plating and that level of nickel plating underneath. So that's going to be a real topic about how do we get alternatives for consumers that are low lead or nickel free. Yeah.
There's lots of work that's gone on within manufacturers over the years to improve in all of the materials that we're using as a sector, hasn't there? How quickly do you think regulations are going to be changing in this particular area?
I'm not sure the regulations are going to change. So, and that brings us back to kind of the Drinking Water Directive. So the Drinking Water Directive, there's been lots of great work in Europe, quite a lot of influence from the UK in terms of what's happening. For lead, it's likely to reduce the standard. So we have 10 micrograms per litre at the tap. They're talking about 5 micrograms per litre, so they're halving the standard. That's quite a big change. So what the water industry has been doing with the 10 micrograms per litre when it reduced to that many years ago is that they've done quite a lot of phosphate dosing. So that reduces the plumber solvency issues and so reduces kind of lead. You can't do that to get to the 5 micrograms. You've got to look at the water fittings. So it kind of changes the attention. Now, the Drinking Water Directive might not come in because of Brexit. It's uncertain. But all of the drinking water quality regulators are saying that they would like to achieve that 5 micrograms per litre standard. So it'll be a choice for the UK government, I think. The Scottish quality regulator is saying as a minimum.
But important to recognise that on materials within the water, it's a whole system approach that needs to be taken, not individual fittings alone.
No, it is a whole system, and there's lots of different fittings that can contribute. And I think the work of the 4 member state is very good. And that's exactly the approach that the positive list takes. So while that's been implemented in Germany and the Netherlands, there isn't plans to do it in the UK yet. And I think they're waiting for Brexit, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen with the Drinking Water Directive as well. But I think we might see some things transposed in. But I think the signals I'm getting from drinking water quality regulators is they want to see what can we do on a voluntary basis first. And actually, I know WRAS Approvals has just started a survey asking approval holders what they think about introducing more information on the directory, so that people can make a choice. So this is about informed choices rather than necessarily mandatory regulation. But we'll have to wait and see, I think.
So moving on a little to installation, obviously my members know an awful lot about the WRAS approval scheme with regard to their products. What are you trying to do in order to improve the situation with regard to getting rid of poor installation?
I'd like a magic wand is what I'd like. I think fundamentally there's a problem with the standards and training of plumbers in the industry as a whole. Our main activity is around our plumber registration scheme. So we apps on behalf of 14 subscribers, and of course we administer WaterSafe with all of the approved contractor schemes. So what we try to do is provide a unifying brand and try and do this positively. So try and give consumers a really positive choice. So if most people choose a plumber based on family recommendations and how tidy something was left and that they did a good price and kind of things like that. But actually when people get a bit more information, they go, actually, I'm just assuming they've got the qualification. So having a register backed by water companies and the Drinking Water Quality Regulator just gives a much better choice. So the register is our kind of primary strategy to help consumers, and having one brand that we can promote is, I think, really important. We also do other stuff. So we run a helpline. So we talk to plumbers every day on our helpline, hopefully before they're about to do some work. And we talk a lot about backflow protection on the phone to try and help them through how they might install it. We have a book, we have leaflets and other areas, so we can talk to people sort of proactively. And they're better because they're preventative strategies, I think. And then where we come across poor practice, we do our best to kind of highlight that, both what the issue is and what the impact is as well. And so if I think back to the prosecution that South West Water did last year of a kitchen fitter who was happily wandering along using lead solder and caused quite significant exceedances in every home that he went into, fit a kitchen, that's quite important to try and just get people to stop and think. And you try and kind of get that information out to other groups. So social media and kind of Facebook and Twitter and all of those areas we've been much more active on, I think.
So tell me a little bit more about WaterSafe. Would you say to a consumer looking to hire a plumber, look for the logo and if in doubt, check our register?
Definitely. So because you want to know that somebody's actually had the proper training. So WaterSafe looks for basic qualifications in plumbing, and that they've got specific training in the water fittings regulations. So they know what to fit to make sure water doesn't flow in the wrong direction so you won't be contaminated. And they know that they should have products that are approved as well. Consumers don't want the complexity of the regulations. They want to find somebody who's qualified and knows what they're doing.
So one of the core objectives of WRAS is to raise awareness of the water fittings regulation. And as you just touched on, they are quite complex and difficult. What challenges do you face on a day-to-day basis trying to communicate those quite tricky issues?
They are tricky. I think, and if we particularly think about consumers, first of all, they're a bit techie. Secondly, people haven't heard of them. And point three, people do not understand what the impact of water is. They don't think it's dangerous, it's colourless, it smells fine, it tastes okay. What's the problem really? So kind of convincing people can be sort of quite tricky. And I think that's why for consumers, rather than saying, here's the regulations and all the duties and responsibilities and you could be a criminal if you don't do it, that's not really a very effective strategy. what we're trying to say more positively is choose a plumber that's qualified, choose products that are compliant, and you don't have to worry about the technical details because it will look after itself. I think that's kind of quite key.
So if there was one message that you'd want BMA members and other manufacturers to take from today's interview, what would it be?
I think I kind of want two messages. I think the first thing is
We'll let you off. You can have two messages.
You spend loads of money on testing and proving compliance, and not everybody else does. So be proud of it and make it really visible, because it is a unique selling point and there's such marketing opportunities. So be proud of your compliance and tell people about it. I think that's kind of first and foremost. And I think the second one is issues around compliance, and particularly on metals. It'd be really good for manufacturers to be part of the solution and not to be seen part of the problem. So start thinking about, and I know lots of your members already have, but think about low-level, low-lead alloys and nickel-free products.
Julie, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.